Hey, Cameron here with Butters Tech. Now you all know I'm a big fan of the ROG Flow X13, and I wanted to do a video with all the concepts that I've used over the years to really optimize my ROG Flow 2023 edition. But this will apply to other X13 models. It probably applies to the G14. The ROG Flow X13 has a 7940HS and an RTX 4070. Whether you have a 4070, a 4060, or a 4050, these concepts will apply, but I'm going to show you how much undervolting may affect your CPU and the CPU performance. Lots of data here. I also have information, curves and graphs that show you when to optimally use the iGPU versus the dGPU. And I just have a bunch of settings that you can apply on your own device to show you how to get the absolute maximum performance out of your Flow X13 or your laptop in general. If that's what your goal is, because there's lots of different goals. We're first going to look at how to maximize performance at all costs, and then we're going to look at how to really optimize performance and have a really nice, really cool laptop that still performs really nicely. So let's take a look at the theory first. Now, this is going to be a true deep dive into things. I will put markers in the video so you can skip ahead into different sections, but I think this stuff is really interesting, and I think you're really going to like what I have to show you here. Okay, so the first thing is, if you're not already, you should be using a program called gHelper. I did a video on this very topic on how to install it and get it set up, and it's definitely what you want to do. Inside gHelper, there are some controls that you have the ability to adjust the undervolt curve on the 7940HS or a similar CPU to that. So what I really wanted to look at is this chart right here. So this is the x-axis is how many watts, and this is how many watts the CPU package has been configured to use, and you have full control over this in gHelper. So at 10 watts, I used Geekbench and calculated the score. So at 10 watts, we're getting 2107. And this is, so we have single core, and the blue is multi-core. And the dotted lines are with a 40 undervolt. So with a negative 40 on your undervolt, this is what the score increased to. So by undervolting, you allow the clocks to be higher within the same power consumption level as before. So that increases performance by undervolting. So if we look at our scores, at 15 watts, we have a multi-score of 8366, but we get that up to 8820 with the undervolt. So as we go up higher, you can see there's one of the big things to notice is as you give the CPU more power, going from 20 to 35 doesn't give you a ton of extra performance. In fact, if you look at the 35 watt score at 11455 stock, that is about the same as the undervolt performance at 25 watts. So you can use a full 10 watts less with an undervolt and get the exact same performance. So that's 10 watts of overhead on your thermal throttling that you can get for free by undervolting and limiting to 25 watts. Okay, and I'll show you how to do that when we create our profile. So undervolting, it may look like that's not a ton higher, but when you get to this edge of the curve, undervolting can get you, 35 watt performance while using 25 watts. Or alternatively, you can get 25 watt performance at 20 watts. So you really can shave down your power consumption without losing performance. And that's what this is all about. So you may be able to hit negative 40. Be careful with this as you play with it. My CPU hit negative 40, no problem, but you may want to try negative 20, and if that works good, go to negative 30. You know, work your way down so you don't crash your computer. But this is the extra performance you can get with undervolting. And what you'll notice is like past 15 watts, your single core performance is kind of capped because, you know, even one core, just one of those 8 cores that are there on the 7940 HS, you know, it's going to max out itself with not a lot of power, which is kind of interesting. In fact, you really don't get anything above 15 watts. You're not helping your single core performance very much at all by giving it more power. So it's really easy to give these chips way too much power, destroying your efficiency, which on a thin and light laptop like the X13 is going to kill your performance quickly. Okay, so that's our undervolt curve on the 7940 HS deep dive. Let's look at something kind of different. And that is, I mentioned this in the intro. A lot of people think if I switch to the iGPU, I'm going to save power. You know, you go into that eco mode. That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true to an extent. So, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that. You're like probably thinking, well, this guy's crazy. What is he talking about? Of course, if I turn on my discrete GPU, if I don't have that turned off, I'm going to suck way more power. Yes, and in Windows and in browsing the web and in most situations, yes, sitting on that iGPU is going to be your best bet. But the second you're playing even a casual game, you may think, oh, I'm just playing Genshin Impact at 30 frames a second. I'm just going to use the iGPU. That's not actually true. And I have the numbers to prove that to you, why that's not true. So here we go. So what I did here is I took a very scalable, I was using Furmark, okay? And what I'm doing here, same thing as in the last graph. You can see we have watts. And what I did was I kept giving, I ran runs on the iGPU and I ran runs on the 4070. And what you can see is if you're only giving, okay, the iGPU can get you 20 frames a second while using 29 watt, 20 frames a second while using about 30 watts from the wall. These numbers are now from the wall. The previous graph was package power. This is literally me with a power meter looking at how much it's pulling from the wall. Okay, so then what I did is I turned on the discrete graphics. Okay, so the blue line is the 4070 and the 780M is that iGPU. So what you can see is like, yeah, so I used 30 watts from the wall to get 20 frames a second on the iGPU, but I wanted more power. So I gave it more power, I gave it more watts, and then I got 27 watts using 40 watts from the wall. Well, I kept giving it more power. I kept setting the iGPU watt higher and higher and higher. And look what happens though. So you can give this thing 60 watts. You're still at 29 frames a second. Okay. So like you were getting at 37 watts, you're getting 25 frames a second. You can give it more power, but you're not going to scale. And in fact, you can actually, okay, so I gave this thing literally all the way up to pulling 107.5 watts from the wall and got 29 frames per second. Never hit 30 frames a second on the iGPU, but fed it tons and tons of power. And so I could actually feed the iGPU more power than I could feed the discrete GPU before it started thermally throttling. So kind of crazy, right? So you can throw a ton of power at an iGPU and go absolutely nowhere. Compare the 4070 at just 35, it looks like 37 watts from the wall. You have this crossover point where for every watt you give the laptop more, it will scale your frame rate more. So that means when you are using the discrete GPU and only pulling like 50 watts from the wall, you're getting about 60 frames per second where you were getting 28 down here. So more than double frames a second at the exact same wattage. So what a lot of people do is like they say, oh, like my laptop's so hot. It's using so much power, you know, and they're on the iGPU, you know, and they've turned on their turbo. So their iGPU is using 60 watts, 70 watts, and it's pulling 100 watts from the wall. 100 watts of heat is on your lap, and you are going nowhere. So you're much better served to take your dGPU and cap it. You can get a really great 60 frames per second performance in most games at 50 watts. And that's when I'm saying 50 watts, I'm not saying package power, I'm saying from the wall. That means instead of having 100 watts in your lap burning you up at 100, you can scale that, turn on the dGPU, limit it to 50 watts, and you're using half the power and you're getting double the performance. So that's, I'm going to do a case study using Persona 3 Reload to show you how you could have a really bad experience on the integrated GPU thinking I'm saving power. But really what you want to do is use a really tweaked profile for the dGPU and have an awesome experience and not burn your lap. And I'm going to show you how to do that coming up. So this is the theory behind what the things that I'm going to show you. So let's get into those scenarios. First, balls to the wall mode. How fast can we make this Flow X13 go? All right, so first our baseline test. This is using the stock turbo configured ASUS settings, and we're just getting the score that you get in TombRaider at turbo performance. So this is just our baseline. Okay, and here's the score coming up, and our average is 123, CPU min is 119, and GPU min is 97. Okay, so for our optimized settings, the first thing you're going to do is open up Device Manager, and you're going to go into the software devices, and you're looking for the NVIDIA platform controllers and framework. You're actually going to disable that device. Okay, this step actually requires a certain version of the driver to be installed because the ability to change the power is not there in different versions of the driver. So the one you want is 528.92. If you do a fresh install of Windows, this is the stock driver that Windows installs. So 528.92 is getting a little old, but it still works great for most things. So it gives us that extra wattage. So 528.92 is the driver you need. You disable your NVIDIA platform controllers and framework. And we're going to open up command prompt. You're going to right click, run as administrator. You're going to type NVIDIA-SMI. And if you look at it, you can see it's set to 35 watts. So we're going to up that. What the NVIDIA platform and controllers framework software device does is it selectively boosts the 35 watts up to 60, but only when it sees that the CPU power is low. So what you're actually going to do here by disabling that NVIDIA platform is telling it not to mess with the power, and this version of the driver lets you use the command NVIDIA-SMI-PL60. And now if we look at our driver, we can see it's now set to 60 all the time. So you're set on 60. The next thing you're going to do using ghelper is here's the regular turbo framework. So what you're going to do is you're going to come over here, and with turbo selected, because that's going to keep the same fan curves, you're going to hit a plus next to here. That's going to let you create a new profile in ghelper. So it says custom, you hit edit. I'm going to call this turbo optimize. So turbo opt. Okay, so now that we've got our turbo optimized profile started, we're going to leave best performance and aggressive. What we are going to do is, we know that there's not a ton of benefit to letting the CPU use a ton of power above 20 to 25. So if we want to, let's keep the CPU at 25 watts, and we're going to click apply power limit. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go over to the advanced tab. And in the advanced tab, whatever you're able to determine how far your CPU can undervolt, mine seems pretty good. -40 has not crashed on me ever. So I'm going to apply that and choose that it auto applies every time we choose the turbo profile, turbo optimized profile. Okay, so I've got my -40 undervolt on the CPU. I'm capping it at 25 watts so it doesn't use more power that the GPU could be using. We're going to go over to the GPU, and we're going to play with the core clock offset. Now, I know that mine is good up to generally 250, but just to be safe, I like keeping it at 225. Memory clock, we're going to put to 100. Again, yours might be slightly different than this. So yeah, that maxes out our GPU. And so we've got all that saved in this profile. So now we're ready to try again and run that benchmark and see what type of scores we get. Okay, and you can see we have a very healthy average frame rate that has gone up quite a bit. So let's look at those numbers and compare them. Okay, so here are our two different TombRaider runs. The red one is the stock turbo run, and the green one is our optimized turbo run with the settings that we changed. And you can see in terms of frame rate, we already know that we got 141 frames versus 123 stock. You can see the differences in these runs. So if you look right here, our average from the time we started to the end was 130 on average stock turbo versus our optimized turbo at 147.5. Again, these started and stopped it at different times. We know our average was 141 versus 123, so we know it was really good. But what's going on here? Well, if we look at the second graph here, this is the CPU power. We can see one of the biggest things we did is we unlocked, 15 extra watts, going up from 45 to 60, where it usually got stuck at that 45. Using the default settings, we unlocked all the way up to 60 watts on that GPU like it's supposed to have. So that was the major thing that really helped us out here, but it's not the only thing. In fact, if we go ahead and change the graph and look at the CPU package power, you can see that we limited that CPU. It didn't exceed 25 watts. And we know from our testing that exceeding those, going above 25, especially an undervolted 25, which is more like 30 anyways, your CPU, while bursting, does help, when you're doing workstation tasks and kind of browsers. Like, having that burst really helps you feel responsive. But in gaming, it actually doesn't really help you because your sustained load is just going to pull down over time. And you can see even using 50 watts, 60 watts, your performance is only going up just marginally, especially over 25 watts in general. And you can see that, what exactly, at least in this use case, did that extra wattage on the CPU do? Well, you can see on the red stock run, it used a whole lot more power. But did that translate into any better frame rate? No, we had better frame rates limiting the CPU and letting it, play the game, giving more power to the GPU, not letting that GPU thermal throttle, because that CPU can really eat power fast for very little benefit. So you can see, even though the package power on the stock run was way higher, it did not translate into a better gaming or a better experience overall. So let's go ahead and look at the GPU clocks just for fun really quick. There you go. Obviously the clocks are going to be higher because we're using more power. So okay, so that's our stock turbo versus turbo optimized. That lets you get the maximum performance out of your device. But sometimes you don't want to do that. In the next scenario we're going to look at trying to use your Flow X13 maybe on your lap, maybe in a more casual gaming situation. And to look at that, we're going to be using Persona 3 Reload because what I see a lot of people talking about is, oh, use your iGPU and you're going to have a much better low power gaming experience if you use your iGPU versus your dGPU. Now, if you're running 2D games, that may be the case, like we saw in the graphs we looked at the beginning of this video. But for, still 3D games, but not ones that need maximum frame rates, or maybe you just want to cap your frame rate at something and have a really good experience, I would warn you against using that iGPU. Because your dGPU in the Flow X13 is actually very efficient. And so yeah, let's look at our case study using Persona 3 Reload. And this is going to be, how to game casually without burning your laptop off with no visible reduction in performance. All right, so let's think about what we're doing. Right now, we've got the discrete GPU enabled. Our RTX 4070 is enabled, but we think, hey, I'm going to play this game. I don't want to use a lot of power. I just want to play over USB-C or something. Let's turn off the RTX GPU and just use the iGPU. It's more power efficient, right? Let's switch to Eco. Okay, so we switch to Eco. All right, that's going to put us only on the iGPU of the 7940HS. We're on that 7080M. And okay, great. Let's start playing. Let's see what it looks like. I've got this power meter on the side so you can watch the wattage. Okay, so right now, loading into the game, we're up to 60 watts, 70 watts, 85 watts. Okay, let's load. We're up to 95 watts on the iGPU. Let's load the game, and I'm going to load it into Polonium Mall, which is one of the most intensive areas of the game. Okay, and here we go. You can hear that fan is screaming already. We're pulling 95 watts, and we are getting how many frames per second? 60, 57. Okay, about right around 60. I don't have VSync on. It just happens to be right around 60. You can see, yep, there we are. We're above 60 to 65 in that area. But in general, we're right around 55 to 60 frames a second. And we're pulling how many watts? Make note of this. 95 watts. 95 watts on that iGPU. Our fans are screaming, okay? But we're getting decent, 60 frames a second's not bad, right? Let's see what we can do. Okay, so here's what you actually want to do, okay? We're gonna switch back into standard mode. We're turning the RTX 4070 back on. Okay, we wanna use that dGPU, but we wanna use it smart, okay? So, I have a profile in here, and it's called, I call it my max performance efficient, and here's what I'm doing in this profile. The first thing I'm doing is I'm capping that CPU at 17 watts. Okay, across the board, 17 watts. The GPU, we're bumping the NVIDIA GPU, we're undervolting it to a very high level. Our memory clock offset's at 100, and we are undervolting the CPU by -40. Okay, so there's the settings. Capped at 17, healthy undervolt, memory overclock, and a -40 undervolt on the CPU. Okay, and here's the last kicker. Okay, just like we use this to change our watts up to 60, I'm actually gonna go the other way. I'm actually gonna bump the NVIDIA GPU down to 25 watts. Okay, I only want it to use 25 watts in any given circumstance. That's the max that we'll use. So we've done that. Now we're using the dGPU smartly to play Persona 3. Let's compare. All right, let's load up Polonia Mall. Exact same area. And here we go. Do you guys see what I'm seeing? Okay, the first thing to notice is we have doubled our frame rate. We are going 120 frames per second. The game caps at 120. So we are going the maximum frame rate experience that we could have with this game. But what's going on with our wattage? Well, it's only 60-ish frames, 60-ish watts from the wall. The iGPU was using 95. That's 35 full watts more on the iGPU to get double the performance. Okay, does it make any sense at all in this scenario to use the iGPU? It absolutely does not. Okay, so this is proof positive that you don't necessarily want to use the iGPU. It's not always going to be more efficient. In fact, for the majority of the curve that we looked at, it is not. And listen, you can barely hear the fans. Before, the fans were absolutely screaming. We're running at 95 watts. We're getting 60 frames a second. So if you want double the performance using almost half the power, use the dGPU. Use that RTX GPU because you're going to get a much better experience with it. So I hope I made my point here. I hope that's very clear. If you don't understand, comment below. But this is how you get a really nice experience, because when you're pulling 60 watts, you can put this on your lap. Look at the temperatures. We're at 65 degrees on the CPU, 66 on the GPU. We're not even close to thermal limiting. The fans are quiet. It does not feel burning hot to the touch. This is a great gameplay experience using a tiny bit of power. So hopefully this really helps you know how to apply these tweaks to get the performance you want within the envelope that isn't going to be something outrageous that's going to be like burning you. And again, the iGPU is not always the best. It's not the best choice in nearly all situations except very low power games. Okay guys, I hope you found that super useful to maximize your Flow X13 or any other Ryzen/NVIDIA combo GPU laptop that you may have in your possession. If you found this useful, go ahead and click one of the Amazon links in the description and subscribe, because there's always more cool videos with unique information. I feel like I look at things pretty differently from most YouTubers. I'm not a YouTuber. I have a different day job. I just think this stuff is cool. I like sharing. And if you like that too, if you like the style of this video, go ahead and subscribe or comment down below, because it does help with the algorithm. Anyways, we'll see you next time.